Greetings, people of the interwebs. Welcome to another episode of Rings of Power. And boy, this episode was a doozy. Oh boy. Boy, oh boy, oh boy. Alright, let's jump into this. So, thankfully, this episode actually does open with a positive note. Celebrimbor is actually forging something. He's creating one of the Nine Rings, because this entire season, and all of the first season, the greatest craftsman in all of Middle-earth, we have not seen him forge, craft, or do anything of the like the entire series until this episode. It's brief, but we finally get to see Celebrimbor make something. So, well done. It only took us, I don't know, like 15 episodes in of this show for the greatest craftsman ever, or since Feanor, to craft something. So then we see Celebrimbor continue to lose his mind, which that actually does get explained a little bit later, which I'll dive into. So the next scene, because, shows Celebrimbor, he's walking outside, looks like a nice, beautiful, pleasant day, but again, that's all in the illusion that Sauron has conjured for him, when in reality, Austin Ethel is being besieged. And so here's something that really bugs me. So, after we see the reality of the non-illusion, the besiegement, there's no, I guess, there doesn't seem to be any defenses. And I know that, somehow when an entire orc army just sneaks across not the entire continent, but a good chunk of the continent of Middle-earth without detection, fair enough, it happens all the time. So, when you're caught unawares, fair enough that you don't have your defenses prepared. Again, how someone didn't detect an entire army, I don't know. But even still, there doesn't seem to be any real defenses of Austin Ethel other than, archers placed on the walls. And walls. That's about it. There doesn't seem to be any, no one seems to be trying to come up with, a counter-assault, or anything like that. Now, typically in medieval warfare, granted, I'm no expert, but typically, as the fashion was, the defenders, on a lot of occasions, had the advantage, because, again, walls, hard to breach, and you just had to outlast your opponent, even if you were outnumbered. However, there were occasions where they would lead sorties outside of the wall to basically catch the attackers off guard, like at nighttime, or to basically just kind of drive them off long enough so that way they could maybe build repairs to their walls or something like that. There's none of this. The city's being besieged and the people are just running around and, none of the soldiers seem to be doing anything other than kind of running with the people. But yeah, so I don't understand, why no one's trying to mount, a counter defense, because in The Lord of the Rings, the biggest siege that we see is the Siege of Minas Tirith. And both in the books, actually the books do, obviously, there's a lot of stuff that the movies had to cut out, because there actually was a counter, a sortie that Prince Imrahil led in the books when the Rohirrim arrived. But all that to say that before the Rohirrim even showed up, there were counter defenses put up, because they knew that, eventually the Orcish armies would break through the defenses, but it would take a while. And so they had a little bit of time to, hold out until Rohan arrived. But yeah, these elves and people of Regen just are clueless, I guess. As soon as they're attacked, well, I guess we'll die now. Ugh. So then the orcs, all of a sudden they start attacking the mountains nearby. And so apparently this is to dam the river. And so, again, there were, occasions in medieval history, and even more modern history, where basically one force would use a river or some kind of geographic feature to their advantage, but in a lot of cases they would use rivers to either flood their opponents, or in the case, in this case, they dammed the river so that way the orcs could actually cross not entirely unheated, but like cross a lot easier because the only entry to Osanetha was a bridge, which could easily be destroyed or just completely blocked off because the orcs would have to funnel in. So, to be fair, a little bit of a smart idea. I mean, I feel like they maybe could have come up with another way to like dam the river. Because obviously, if they had an entire army march all the way, from Mordor to Osanethil, probably could have just cut down some trees and built a dam instead of using their siege weapons to attack a mountain and just happen to, collapse part of the mountain to dam the river. And the river dammed up pretty fast. I admit, I'm no expert on damming rivers or any kind of body of water, but that river seemed to dry up pretty much instantaneously as soon as, like, the rocks collapsed into the water. But anywho, so I don't know. Maybe that's possible that a river could dam, or the river could dry up that quick. I have no clue, but it seemed a little improbable to me. So then we see Arondir magics to Eregion because fast travel, it's something that, Tolkien wrote so much about in the lore. You really gotta dig deep, though, to find where the fast travel happens. But this show, I love how the writers and the showrunners really understood that element of Tolkien's lore that no one else seems to know about at all with fast travel, and how people can just, zoom across Middle-earth in no time. So then we get to Khazad-dûm, and we see Durin the Third just acting greedy AF, is how I put it in my notes. Because he's just like, we gotta mine. Because again, that's one thing that, yes, the Rings of Power for the dwarves did enhance their greed, but this show is just going ham with that. Like, Durin the Third he's cartoonishly greedy. And it's so ridiculous, among many other things about this show. But yeah, they went all out with the greediness of the Dwarvish Rings. So then after that, we get another elf who magics himself, Elrond, who was just right outside of Eregion, about to lead the armies to save Osanethil. But then he magics to... I guess he manages to, navigate around the Orcish army, because I guess no one has scouts, and it's just super easy to, maneuver yourself around armies, and, vast distances without being spotted. But anyways, so he teleports inside Khazad-dûm, and he's basically like, hey, Durin, so you're about to be attacked, I could really use your help. And, of course, Durin is kind of like, got your back, homie. And, he pledges his support, which does make sense, because they're good pals. They kind of... forge their friendship, and that was one of the few highlights of the first season, is their relationship. Boy. Need more alcohol to finish this show. So yeah, then the next scene we go back to the river's dried up super fast, and then the orcs start crossing the remnants of the river, and then they have a ram. And so, rams would not be out of place for a siege, but rams were typically used on gates of cities because, rams wouldn't be super effective against just pure stone walls. And that's why typically, anytime you see a siege in movies, whether it be like actual, historical movies or medieval movies with like sieges, they're usually war battering rams. And they would go after the gates, because the gates, even though if they were reinforced, were still easier to breach than stone walls. But again, they're not going through the bridge. They're not crossing that bridge to breach any of the gates into the city. They're dragging this ram across muddy terrain, because again, this river has now completely dried up, but it's still going to be like very muddy and difficult to transport a siege engine. But anyways, so to me, a bit of flawed logic, much like most of this show. So then finally, Celebrimbor realizes that he's been ensorcelled by Sauron. Everything's been an illusion, because throughout the episode, there's been like a mouse that he sees. It does like the same thing, kind of skitters across the floor, then it stands on its hind legs, and then it goes back to doing its thing. So that's when Celebrimbor, like after the third time, finally realizes that something's up. And he then confronts Sauron, or Anatar, realizes that he's Sauron, and Sauron's just kind of like, Yeah, dude, I've been Sauron the whole time, and I've been deceiving you. So, oh man, and then he Celebrimbor, now that he's realized what's going on, he rushes outside and sees that the siege is going on, and so he scales the walls. And then he goes to Myrdania. Now, here's one thing that I don't understand. So he goes to Myrdania and he explains to her, like, oh yeah, Anatar, he's Sauron the whole time. So, this show has never really established who Myrdania is, outside of she's an elf, obviously, and presumably she's a member of the Gwaithmyrdain, which are the guild members that Celebrimbor formed, were basically their guild of craftsmen. Other than that, like, what makes her so important? Like, why would he go to her specifically and not like any other of the members of the Gwaithmyrdain? And why is she standing out like on the battlements of during the siege, anyways? Because clearly she's just a craftsperson. She doesn't seem to be like a military expert or a warrior of any kind. So why is she standing atop the walls? And why are, like, the guards allowing her to do this? Because you would think they'd be like, hey, you're not a warrior. Unless you're coming here to fight and help us out, you should, like, go to a safe area. But instead, she's up there on the walls, just kind of staring. And, Celebrimbor goes to her. He explains, that Anatar's Sauron, which earlier Sauron had kind of convinced her and, like, some of the other elves that, like, Celebrimbor had lost his mind, so she's not really convinced by Celebrimbor, because he's looking very disheveled at this moment. But I don't know. I just thought that was odd that they've never really established who Myrdania is and why she's important, other than the fact that she's just another elfish smith of the city. That's it. Like, she's not. They've never established, like, if she's an important figure, or why, again, Celebrimbor would seek her out during the siege rather than, like, maybe gather another, like, a council of other important figures in the city. I don't know. It's nitpicky, I admit, but I just thought that was so weird. So then, actually, a cool move with Sauron is, so Celebrimbor, he's trying to, convince Myrdania that, Antar is Sauron once he shows up, but he's just kind of like, no, I'm definitely not a Sauron. I'm not a bad guy. Look at this beautiful face in this wig. And of course, everyone's convinced. And so Celebrimbor is trying to reach out to Myrdania and try to convince her that he's telling the truth. And Sauron kind of uses his force powers basically to make it look like Celebrimbor kind of like tossed her off the walls and she falls to her death. So good move on Sauron. Like, again, this is the version of Sauron we should have been seeing since season 1, and I've been saying that pretty much since the first episode that we got this version of Sauron as Anatar, the giver of gifts, Lord of Gifts. This is how we should have been introduced to him, not Halbrand. And again, Charlie Vickers has been doing a much better job as Anatar than, again, Halbrand. But yeah, so I thought that was very, very on brand for Sauron to do. And then he proposes that after he kind of tosses Myrdania off the walls, he kind of leans into Celebrimbor and he's kind of like, hey, so if you finish making the 9 rings, I'll spare your city. And reluctantly, Celebrimbor agrees. And then we get the elf army magics to Eregion. Because again, this show, the writers, they really knew just the importance of teleportation and fast travel that Tolkien never wrote about. But they knew instinctively that that's what that man was all about, fast travel. And then the least epic cavalry charge that I think I've ever seen halts abruptly, because right before they're about to charge into the Orcish ranks, they reveal that Galadriel's been captured, and they stop. So, no expert here, but I'm pretty sure, like, when you're, like, at full momentum with a whole army of, like, horsemen, or horse elves in this case, it'd be hard to stop that suddenly when they're only, I don't know, maybe like 10 feet away from the Orcish army. Again, no expert, but I would think that like when you've built up that kind of momentum, you can't just stop. Even if like the front line did try to stop, the rear guard would they just smash into each other. But of course they all stop because someone saw Galadriel and decided, you know what, we should maybe not charge into this army, even though they have the advantage as cavalry, because 9 times out of 10, cavalry always had the advantage over footmen. But anywho, so they stop, and Adar reveals, again, captured Galadriel. Then he proposes an alliance with Elrond, and somehow knew that Celebrimbor welcomed Sauron into Osnithil. It's weird that Adar is the smartest person in this show, and we don't know how he's coming to these conclusions. Again, he somehow figured out that Halbrand was Sauron the whole time, even though everyone else, the wisest people in Middle Earth, went over their heads. Yet this Adar dude knew that knew about the forging the Elvish rings. He knew that Celebrimbor welcomed Sauron in, and he knew that Halbrand was Sauron. So this guy is, I guess, the Sherlock Holmes of Middle Earth, I guess. I don't know. And then, during his whole proposal of an alliance, he asks for Elrond's Ring of Power. Again, why he thinks that the Elvish Rings of Power can defeat Sauron. And again, the whole Crown of Morgoth, which I covered in the last episode. So there is no canon that, Morgoth's crown had any kind of magical properties to it. And I also, even if it did, I don't know what the logic behind using a magical crown and 3 Elvish rings could defeat Sauron. They have not explained that whatsoever. That's a thing that this show is really good at, is basically being like, hey, trust me, bro, and then just, they expect you to not ask questions at all, and just, they keep moving forward without explaining anything. So much stuff happens off screen, and then I guess we're expected to infer what happened off screen. It's incredibly lazy, and it's very frustrating. But anywho, so after that, so Elrond refuses, which is smart. He's just kind of like, yeah, no, I'm not giving you my Ring of Power. You can keep Galadriel, which was smart. But then he goes in and he kisses her. So, okay. This is one thing that's really been bothering me about this show, is they're basically trying to, the relationship between Galadriel and Elrond is this very... Initially, it kind of started off as this almost kind of sibling-type situation. Then it's in this season, it's they're trying to hint that there's something more to it, but here's the thing. So in the actual books, so Elrond marries Galadriel and Celeborn, who's still, I guess, dead, because, even though they were, inseparable in the actual lore. But, yeah, Celeborn's dead, who cares? He's not important. But anyways, in the actual lore, in the books, Elrond marries Celebrian, which is Celeborn and Galadriel's daughter. Again, Celebrian is also gone because, Celeborn is supposedly still dead. Where he's roaming around in Middle-earth, we don't know. Or maybe this show is just going to confirm that he's dead because they clearly don't give a shit about the lore. But yeah, so he kisses Galadriel. So stupid. So incredibly stupid. And I know, the whole thing was, he gave her, that was a whole ploy so that way he could discreetly give her, a lockpick or whatever. It's just stupid. 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 So then flip back to Moria, or Khazad-dûm, and we got Durin the Younger rallying the troops, giving a speech of hey, we gotta go fight. Then Durin also knows that Sauron is Annatar that the rings are basically were forged by him to basically control people. So even though I do like the fact that Durin has been one of the few people who has kind of been wary of Annatar, I don't know how he figured out that he was Sauron, though. Unless... Because I don't think Elrond told him when he magicked himself to Khazad-dûm. I could be wrong, because... Yeah, it's hard to follow this show because it's just so stupid. But I don't recall Elrond saying that Sauron was Anatar, because I don't think Elrond would know that either. But so apparently, again, almost everyone else has figured this out. But again, the wisest elves, Gil-galad, Elrond, Galadriel, none of them knew. But so he somehow knows, and knows that the rings are were crafted so that way Sauron could control and manipulate the free people of Middle Earth. Again, how he knows that, I don't know. And again, granted, it kind of does track with his apprehension and suspicion of Anatar, but again, how he figured out he was Sauron and how he knew about the whole purpose of the rings, I don't know. Another thing this show's really good at is just a lot of people making like all these conclusions based on very little evidence. So then Elrond horse dies. He's angry, and he starts just going on a murdering spree of orcs. And then we get so Edar's wanting to kind of press the siege, whereas the orcs are kind of like, oh man, we don't want to do this. We just want to go back home. And Adar keeps pushing him because he's like, hey, we got to defeat Sauron, because if we don't defeat Sauron, if we don't defeat these elves, then we can never have peace. And it seems like there's a bit of some of the orcs are starting to grow very unhappy with Adar, because he's essentially becoming like how Sauron was. But yeah, they just orcs are people too in this show. They just want to get to their families and live happy lives by seaside cottages. So then, next scene, Galadriel escaped because of course she does. So then she's cloaked, she's disguised wandering through the orc camp trying to escape, and she sees Adar performing like this ritual for the dead orcs, lighting them on fire like these funeral pyres. But I feel like this scene is sort of like, I feel like they're trying, like, not directly ripping off, which they have done a lot with the Peter Jackson movies, but I feel like they're trying to evoke the same scenes when Frodo and Sam were in their orcish armor trying to navigate through Mordor, or Gorgoroth more specifically, to Mount Doom. So I feel like they're trying to do the same thing there with Galadriel. But of course, someone spots her, but before they can sound the alarm, Galadriel gets rescued by Arondir, because he can just teleport anywhere. And he's dead set on killing Adar for revenge. And, he tells Galadriel that. He's like, I got nothing left. He's taken everything from me. She's like, maybe don't do that, but you do you, bro. And then they part ways. So the next thing we see is back to Khazad-dûm. Narvi's all bloodied and asks Durin the Younger to call off the fight to stop Durin the Elder, who's, again, hell-bent on digging. That's all he wants to do is dig, 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 dig. And turns out this looks like this was an illusion conjured by Sauron from afar. So again, here's another thing, is I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility, and I mentioned this in the last episode, I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility for Sauron to conjure illusions and stuff like that. But for him to conjure an illusion that grand a distance and, I guess, make it feel so real? I feel like might be a bit of a stretch, even for someone as powerful as Sauron, but maybe that's just me being nitpicky here. I don't know. But, so then Sauron, he's, got Celebrimbor all shackled up, trying to, finish those 9 rings, and tells him this whole sob story of, like, how he was tortured by Morgoth. And it kind of reminisces, to me, it's reminiscent of, like, a villain monologuing about, like, how they weren't loved as a child, like, by their parents or, whatever, they were bullied, and that's the whole motivation to get back to the world, because they're like, no one liked me as a kid, they bullied me, they shoved me into lockers, so I shake my fist at them and I'm angry, that's why I'm doing this. And so it just comes, I don't know, to me it comes across as very lazy. Now there's one moment in this monologue that he's given to Celebrimbor that I don't hate. And lost my spot here in my notes. So he tells that Morgoth wished to destroy everything, whereas Sauron wished to perfect everything, which is sort of true. Because basically, Morgoth, once he wasn't able, because his whole motivation is he wanted uh, to be able to create, but Eru Iluvatar is the one that can truly create life. Like Sauron or Morgoth or other Valar could create things, but they couldn't bring them to life. They couldn't give them the flame imperishable. They would essentially just be like these kind of lifeless automatons. And so that was the whole reason that one of the many reasons that Morgoth kind of corrupted the elves, because if he couldn't create his own beings to serve his will, he would take the pre-existing beings, the elves and humans, and twist them to his own devices. That way he could use them for his evil. And so, again, after he couldn't get his way, he was just hell-bent on destroying everything that Eru and the other Valar created. And so Sauron, after Morgoth's defeat, after he laid low for a little bit, again, this is in the canon, because Sauron was a servant of Aule the Smith, one of the Valar, and also the one who created the dwarves. But anyways, so Sauron, having served under Aule, he liked order, because he was a craftsman himself, but he liked order. And so after Morgoth was defeated, the Valar were kind of hands-off with Middle-earth and its affairs. Sauron felt like, alright, it's my duty to kind of step in and bring stability back to the world. So in his own warped mindset, Sauron viewed himself as the good guy, because he's like, hey, the Valar are gone, Morgoth is gone, absolute chaos, someone has to just step in and bring people together. And so that's kind of what he's getting at here. So again, it's fairly accurate to the lore. So again, I do try to bring up what few accuracies there are, or good lines of dialogue in this show, which again are few and far between, but I do like to acknowledge them when they do happen. So then after that, I really, again, here's one of the few good lines in this show, is, after Sauron explains that, Celebrimbor says that, he says, you truly are the great deceiver, because you've even deceived yourself. So what I like about this scene, and this line of dialogue in particular, is, because again, I think Celebrimbor realizes that kind of warped mentality of Sauron, where, again, in Sauron's eyes, in his vision, he is this great godlike being who is bringing order back to Middle-earth. But Celebrimbor kind of sees, oh, this dude's just so far gone that he's even deceived himself in believing this lie. So, again, that was actually a really good line, and whoever wrote that line of dialogue, good job. You're one of the few people doing your job here. So then after that, Sauron kind of walks outside, and, while Celebrimbor is supposed to be forging the rings, he finishes them, but then he tosses them in the forge, hoping that he can destroy them. But doesn't happen. They're actually quite cool, and then he kind of panics and stuffs them in a bag, and he just tries to dip out. But so he's shackled, and so the only way he can kind of free himself from his shackle is he ends up chopping off one of the thumbs, so that way he can get the shackle off of his wrist with the 9 rings. And then after he kind of escapes, that's when Galadriel shows up, because he just got captured by his own elves, because again, they're under Anatar's command now, because apparently whenever Celebrimbor is busy doing other things, I guess just anybody with any kind of authoritative figure can just kind of be like, I'm Lord of Eregion now, you will follow me, and they follow him. But yeah, so they pick him up, they try to take him away, because they're like, dude, you've lost your mind, and, Anatar, he doesn't want you wandering around. But Galadriel shows up because, she knew a secret passage into the city, and just happened to find Celebrimbor at the time that she needed to, and gives us, so basically she tries to convince him to leave, because, he mentions the 9 rings, but he decides to stay behind, and then the guards who were literally just about to capture him, and take him back to Anatar were kind of like, hey, we're with you. And, I don't know, I just thought that was weird that, like, very, very quickly, it didn't take a whole lot of convincing for them to be like, oh, yeah, okay, yeah, I guess Celebrimbor is the actual lord, so we should probably follow his command. So then Celebrimbor gives Galadriel of the Nine Rings, and he's kind of like, hey, you go, I gotta go confront Sauron with, like, these handful of guards, because this is all it'll take to defeat Sauron. I don't know why everyone's so convinced that they can defeat Sauron with just, like, 6 people. So, that being said, this is sort of not as cool of a way as Celebrimbor in the actual lore, because basically when Osnafil is besieged, Celebrimbor basically does make, like, this final last stand to confront Sauron when Sauron's attacking the city, which is interesting. And I think I brought it up in the last video. It's interesting that, like, one of the biggest events of the Second Age that Tolkien actually did write about, the War of Sauron and the Elves, when Sauron found out that the Elves forged the 3 rings in secret, which they were forged after, instead of the first ones to be forged. But that's a whole other thing. So basically, he went to war with Eregion and the Elves there to reclaim the 3 Elvish rings and also the other rings of power that he would later distribute to the dwarves and men. But yeah, so referred to as the War of Sauron and the Elves, or Elves and Sauron. I forget which order it is, but basically, yeah, that's the name of the war, and so it's a big part of the Second Age. Sauron is not leading this war at all. They gave that role to Adar. I don't understand Adar's role in this show. This should be Sauron. Should be, like, launching this assault. Like, the stuff that we're seeing with Anatar and Celebrimbor, that should have been Season 1, instead of the stupid shit, like, nonsense filler that we got in Season 1. This should have been Season 1, or a lot of it. Again, with, like, Celebrimbor and Anatar, that should have been a lot of Season 1, but instead they decided to do their own stupid fanfic, and yeah. I've lost my place again. Oh yeah, here we go. So then Celebrimbor gives this speech to Galadriel of, like, hey, light is always enduring. And I feel like they're not directly ripping off, like, the Peter Jackson trilogy, but I think they're trying to evoke that same speech that Sam gives in The Two Towers to Frodo, where, he's like, there's still good in this world worth fighting for, and then again, it's a very emotional, very inspiring speech that Sam gives, and I feel like they're trying to do that same thing, but it just doesn't land at all in this show, because even when they are directly ripping off from, like, the books, or even the Peter Jackson movies, it's just so clunky and so poorly written that, like, even when they're trying to be emotional or trying to be very, like, I don't know, thought-provoking or evocative, it doesn't land. So then, yeah, after that, he gives Galadriel the 9 rings. He's like, go, I got this. Because, again, I've got 6 good elf dudes. We can definitely defeat Sauron. So then after that, we go to the battle, kind of outside the walls. Random archer chick, like, Elrond is kind of like, hey, you know what to do, right? You got that one arrow left that can turn the tide of battle somehow. And then she gets hit with, like, 3 different arrows, and, with her dying breath, she manages to fire off that one arrow and blow up the ram. Again, this is one of those scenes that I'm sure in their heads they were like, oh, it's going to be so dramatic and, like, super sad that this elf chick, I don't remember her name, she was only in, like, 1 episode prior and had very few lines of dialogue, like, no development. But again, I feel like they're trying to make this a very dramatic scene where, like, oh, brave elf chick, kind of like a Boromir moment where she takes all these arrows, but with her dying breath manages to save the day. I don't know who this character is, so I don't care that they died. And again, it's complete filler. So another thing too, with, like, so I was expecting this episode to, at least, since it was primarily very action-oriented, to at least be entertaining in terms of, like, action. Not very... This show has learned nothing. In all regards. Because, like, they can't even really... There's not even good choreography in the fight scenes. Like, it's just very... Again, much like the dialogue, it's very clunky, and it feels very, very staged. Because, obviously when we watch movies or TV shows with action scenes, we know that it's not real, but good choreography makes it look real and makes us sit on the edge of our seats being like, oh, is that character about to die? Or, oh man, like that looks really painful if a character gets, stabbed or shot or punched in the face or whatever. Like, there's a way to choreograph it to make it look real and make us feel invested in the fight scenes. I don't feel any of that in this show at all. So I don't know where the budget is going with the show. Even though, again, yes, most of the visuals do look good, but everything else is just awful. So then after that, Celebrimbor confronts Sauron in his forge, because Sauron's looking for the Nine Rings, and he's like, "Oh, you'll never find them here. They're long gone, Sauron." And yeah, it has the elf guys like surround Sauron to arrest him, I guess. I don't really know what his plan is. But then Sauron again does like his Force Jedi mind trick thing, and it's like, "Oh, you thought you were the only one I had under my control?" And then he like mind controls the elf dudes all kill each other. It's another thing too. So again, Tolkien's magic system is it's soft magic. Like, he doesn't go into a lot of explanation and detail on how it works, but it's used sparingly. And so, again, even though he doesn't go into a lot of detail, and it's not featured heavily like in other fantasy fiction, or works of fiction, whether it be like books, movies, games, whatever, I still feel like they're taking a lot of creative liberties and just having Sauron or any character with magical abilities. They're just magic can do whatever the script needs it to do in that moment. So in this moment, they're like, "Hey, Sauron needs to get out of this situation. Let's have him like Jedi mind trick these elves to kill each other." Okay, cool. Just like how the Rings of Power can like heal people instantly, and again, instantly bring life back to the trees in Linden. It's ridiculous. So then the troll, like this troll that I feel like the show was trying to hype up for showing up. So this troll finally shows up in battle and really doesn't do a whole lot. Like, yeah, it stomps a few people and, swings its club and kills some people, but it really doesn't do a whole lot before it dies. And I know that, like, they're also, I feel like they're also trying to hype this troll up by basically saying that, like, "Oh, we based this troll off of Mike Ehrmantraut from Breaking Bad." I don't get any of that. I don't know what they based, or how they based this troll off that character from the show, but I didn't get any of that. Because we only had 2 scenes with this troll. The first one where, he arrives in Adar's camp and asks where Sauron was. And then this scene where he charges into battle and then dies shortly afterwards. So very anticlimactic, much like most events in this show. So then random elf dude at daybreak arrives and mentions to Elrond, it's like, "Oh yeah, by the way, he's not coming. He recalled his armies." Then they shut off the walls of Khazad-dûm. So again, in the actual lore, the dwarves did shut the gates of Durin. But that was, I don't think they actually took part in the battle. But that actually did happen, where basically, like, once Eregion was pretty much, everyone knew that, like, it was going to be destroyed. The dwarves sealed the gate shut because they didn't want the orcs and Sauron to cross into their realm and cause the same havoc and destruction. Sure. So then we get to see Gil-galad actually do something. So the High King of the Noldor, one of the greatest elvish kings in the actual lore, like in the books, there are songs dedicated to Gil-galad and his bravery, his heroism. We've seen none of that in this show. Like, Gil-galad is a terrible piece of shit in this show. But we at least get to see him do something other than, like, really just chew the scenery and overact. Like, I don't really care for, one, the portrayal of Gil-galad in this show, like, at all. Because much like a lot of characters, it's very anti-Gil-galad and anti-Tolkien. But that's a whole other thing. But again, we get to see him use Aglos, which is his spear, and get to kill some orcs, so cool. Gil-galad's finally doing something. He's being heroic, like he should be. Or should have been from the beginning. So then Arondir and Adar fight. So, yeah, again, Arondir, he's dead set on fighting and killing Adar, so he confronts him in the battlefield. And again, it's the most anticlimactic fight ever, where they kind of stab each other, and then Adar, like, I don't think Arondir's dead, but it's probably supposed to be a dramatic moment. It's like, oh, he deals a deathly blow and Arondir's dead. Ooh, sad, because he's everyone's favorite character, which, yeah, he probably is one of the only few decent characters in this show, but I still didn't really feel anything about him potentially dying, because, one, I don't think he actually is dead, but even if he is, I still felt no emotional attachment to this character, because he didn't really have any, like, again, there's no real emotional stakes in any of these characters for me. So after that, Adar confronts Elrond because they had a whole back and forth when they were trying to negotiate like the alliance, and Elrond's like, "You can have my head in battle if you can claim it," and so of course, understandably, Elrond is very upset because he was really relying on during the third arriving at the Dwarvish armies. He doesn't, so he's just very distraught and dejected, and so it's really not even a fight at all. Like Adar just kind of kicks the crap out of him, and then takes his one ring of power. Which, again, why Adar believes the rings of power can defeat Sauron, I have no clue. There's no logic behind that. Even in the show, they have not established how the rings and the Crown of Morgoth can defeat Sauron. If they're going to jump to these conclusions, at least give us some kind of information as to how this would be useful, or how this could be, used to destroy Sauron. But this show is just so poorly written that they can't seem to do anything other than just basically be like, hey, trust me, bro, don't ask questions. And all these contrivances. And yeah, this show is awful. I didn't think it could get any worse than season 1, especially, and I keep saying this, they had 2 years. They had 2 full years to take the constructive criticism from season 1 of like, hey, here's what people didn't like, here's what didn't work, here's where we could use, make improvements. Instead, they were just kind of like, what? No, people didn't have any constructive criticism at all. They said we were amazing, so we're just going to keep doing our thing and keep being amazing. And I'm also still, this further cements that I don't think anyone read the books. They kept saying that anytime they weren't sure about something, they kept going back to the books. Back to the books is what they said. What books are they talking about? Because clearly it's not the Lord of the Rings books. Otherwise, this show would not be the fucking mess that it is. This show would actually be accurate to the lore, or at least more accurate to the lore than what it is. But instead, they just took the names of characters and locations and just copied and pasted them in their stupid fucking fanfic and thought this was great. And again, that's another thing too. This show, Amazon needs to cancel this show. Not only because do I think it's terrible, and I think that's a justifiable reason to cancel it because this show's terrible. Not just in my opinion. A lot of people agree, but this show is not bringing in the viewership to warrant the insane amount of money that Amazon have invested in this show. So why continue? Like, let season 2 finish its last episode, which, thank God, this has been such a slog to get through. And again, I was hoping that this episode would at least be more entertaining. Not necessarily good, but at least more entertaining, because it was primarily action. Yet they couldn't even achieve that. It was so boring, so slow-paced, and again, the choreography and the action scenes were terrible. So even this episode that was supposed to be this epic battle was boring. And again, nothing really happens in this show. Very little of consequence or importance happens at all in this entire show. 90% of it is complete filler. But yeah, so I don't see any logic on why Amazon should keep going with this show. Granted, I know that they're contractually obligated to do 5 seasons, and I'm no lawyer, so I don't know if there are any stipulations and if there's a way they can get out of that, or what, or if they do get out of it, they just have to pay like a dump truck of money to the Tolkien estate. I don't know, but to me, I'm sure it would, like, if that's the thing, is like if they don't commit to that 5 seasons, they do have to pay the Tolkien estate more money. It'd probably be cheaper to do that than to keep going with the next 3 seasons of this show with the insane amount of money they invested. Or 2, if they continue with this show, they're going to have to cut the budget, like, significantly. And even though Amazon have all the money in the world, and really, and this is, I guess, why I'm leaning towards them probably just powering through this stupid show, is because Amazon's streaming service is it's kind of secondary to their business. They don't require their streaming service. This is not their main source of income, unlike Netflix, where that's entirely what that company is built off of, is streaming. Or even other companies like HBO Max, or Max now, is a subsidiary of Warner Brothers. And even though Warner Brothers obviously makes most of their money through their movies and shows, Max still gives them extra revenue to invest in more shows, more movies. Whereas Amazon, they make so much off just, Amazon, their primary business of like shipping and stuff like that, to where they might be willing to take the $200 million or however much it costs per season for Rings of Power to just power on through and get it over with. I don't know. But either way, they've got to be panicking. Regardless of what they end up doing. There is no way that like the board, the finance people of Amazon are pleased with how Rings of Power has turned out. So yeah, if I had any say in the matter, I'd be like, bite the bullet, cancel this show. No one cares. No one likes it. It's not good. Maybe in a few years we can restart and try again and actually do a good job. Because again, here's the thing that blows my mind so much and continues to blow my mind is the sheer amount of money that Amazon invested in this show, both seasons, and just to get the rights to, to The Lord of the Rings, the appendices, and The Hobbit. The sheer amount of money that they threw at this, and yet for whatever reason, they didn't bother to put the time and effort into actually crafting this show. It's very much like, again, it's the most expensive show ever made, yet it feels so cheap. It feels more like a soap opera. Like, I actually saw someone, I forget who it was on the, I forget if it was a YouTuber, but anyway, someone had compared this show to basically a soap opera. And it does. It feels like a soap opera, because soap operas are made super cheap, and, even if they're terrible, it doesn't matter because they're made super cheap, and you can just crank those things out, no problem. This show has the quality of, like, in terms of the writing, production value, for the most part. Again, gotta give credit where it's due. Visuals overall look pretty good. Music score by Beer McCreary has been solid throughout both seasons. But overall, like, I feel like the costuming is kind of bland. The writing is obviously terrible. The action sequences are poorly choreographed. So it blows my mind that the insane amount of money that Amazon invested in this show, and it feels so incredibly cheap. But anyway, I've gone off on a huge side tangent here. But yeah, that wraps up my review of episode 7. Oh god, I'm so glad that we only have one episode left, and I really hope the show gets canceled. So that way I don't have to sit through any more seasons, because the main reason that I've even bothered to endure this season is I feel like as a Tolkien fan, I feel like it's my duty to hold this show accountable. And same thing with War of the Rohirrim. When that comes out later this year, I'm going to review it, and if it's good, I'll review it and tell you lovely people of the interwebs how good it is. Or if it's bad, I'm going to tell you why it's bad, and again, hold it accountable. So that way, hopefully, you all will know why. Like, again, I can contextualize why I did not like, or I don't like this show, or maybe why I won't like War of the Rohirrim. Because, I think that's important for anybody of any fandom, is to call it out, so that way we can hopefully get better quality content. Like, yes, there's definitely a lot of, like, the hate out there for, like, Star Wars and Marvel and all that stuff, but a lot of the criticism comes from fans who are very passionate about their franchises, and they're like, hey, I'm calling you out because I want good content. That's all I'm asking for. Give me good storytelling. Give me good characters. That's all we're asking for. So, yeah. So anyways, before I go off on another side tangent there, so let me know your thoughts below. Have you even bothered to watch any more of this show? If you have, what did you think about episode 7? Did you think it's one of the better episodes? Or are you like me and you're done, you want the show to end? Please, for the love of God, to end this show and put me out of my misery. But that wraps up this review. Hopefully you enjoyed, and until next time, everyone, cheers.